All right. Hello, everyone. Can we all see and hear me clearly without any technical issues or anything like that? Very good. Well, welcome everyone once again. I guess I must have had an excellent night's sleep last night because I'm not nearly as, well, sleepy as I usually am for my morning classes, which is nice if you are somebody like me who, um, I don't know, has always seemed to have trouble with having a good night's sleep. Before we begin, there is a preamble in the lecture slides, but I have a pre-preamble, just a little thing that I think is worth pausing and discussing today, and that is the news of the passing of Dr. Jane Goodall. Did you all hear about this yesterday? Yeah, big news. Big news. Yeah, definitely rest in peace, Dr. Goodall. I wanted to say a little something for a couple of reasons. One is that, not that this is a focus of this class, but some of the thinkers we've looked at, like Descartes, for example, um, had a pretty peculiar view of animals, like non-human animals. I mean, obviously, we are a part of the animal kingdom. Um, Thinkers like that thought of animals as these mere beast machines, these sort of unfeeling robots. Um, Jane Goodall, in her role as a primatologist, was a really important figure in terms of how she moved the needle on that. Certainly not the only one, but just in my lifetime, I think Dr. Goodall was one of those scholars that um, got us to rethink our relationship with the rest of the animal kingdom. And this, thanks to her work with chimpanzees, working in studying wild chimpanzee populations and helping people to realize just how human-like they are. Oh, Isaac. Well, that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. Yeah, Jane Goodall. She was a primatologist. She studied primates, and I think quite arguably, helped move that needle toward a better understanding of our relationship to the rest of the animal kingdom, particularly primates, um, and our role, our sort of place within the animal kingdom. That's one reason I wanted to sort of, eulogize Dr. Goodall. And yeah, Khalid, you're absolutely right. We are like 98% similar in terms of our genes to the common chimpanzee and the bonobo. So those are two different kinds of chimpanzees. You see something human-like in each of them. Common chimps are violent, warlike, patriarchal. Bonobos tend to be more peaceful, um, and they're matriarchal, which is very interesting. And there are elements that we see in ourselves that we also see in both of those types of creatures. Um, Another reason I kind of wanted to say a little something like this kind of hits close to home. In the 10th grade, I remember my 10th grade science teacher, Miss Gom. Shout out to Miss Gom if you're out there, if you're watching this. Look at me, I made it. I'm a professor now. But back in the day, I was a very well, I'm not going to say a poor student, but a student who had trouble understanding why I was made to go to school and learn the things I was meant to learn when I could be learning other things I was more interested in at home, right? Kind of a misfit. Kind of the loner, the bookish kid, you know what I'm saying? The sort of person who ends up being a university professor. Um, and Miss Gom was charged with the task of selecting two people from the grade 10 science class. There were two people selected from every grade at the time to go and attend the Roots and Shoots conference. at Laurentian University in Sudbury, which was a conference really all about creating a sort of environmental awareness, scientific literacy, that sort of thing. We did activities, broke up into groups, did activities, heard talks. That conference was organized by the Roots and Shoots Foundation, which was Jane Goodall's project. And Jane Goodall actually gave the keynote address at that meeting. And I remember thinking, thinking back on it, that was a very formative experience. I remember there was a moment when I realized like this kid who lives in the middle of nowhere in Northern Ontario, who's just a bit of a science nerd. I'm in the same room as Jane Goodall right now. Wow. Um, and it was really interesting to hear her speak, and it was also really I didn't understand for a very long time why my science teacher chose me out of all people to go and check this out. But in retrospect, I think it was a very formative moment, which kind of eventually led me to what I'm doing here, which is not just teaching philosophy. As you know, or maybe as you don't know, my PhD is actually in cognitive science, not philosophy. So I'm something of a scientist myself, I suppose. Um, and it's just crazy to think that, um, how a sort of encounter with a figure of the sort of stature as Dr. Goodall, has kind of shaped where I've ended up speaking to you now. And really, in a sense, I guess I owe not just my science teacher for that, but Dr. Goodall. So rest in peace, Jane Goodall. Legend, absolute legend. So that's the pre-preamble. Now the preamble. I'm hoping that today's lecture can be a little bit more discussion based because we are talking about feminist epistemology, and one of the things that we just have to state outright is that men have held a privileged position in philosophy and in the sciences for many, many years. I mean, that's changed recently. It's not perfect, right? We're doing a lot better in terms of reaching like gender parity in philosophy and in science. In fact, I think in the philosophy department here at Carleton, um, we're pretty good in terms of gender parity. I think actually there are fewer men than there are women who are teaching philosophy here in their role as professors. Well, chimpanzees, I would say, do know quite a lot. Um, I mean, chimpanzees are very, very clever. I mean, a lot of the things that we think are unique to ourselves, like tool use, for example, we've seen in chimpanzee populations and in other non-human animals too. So, New Caledonian crows, for example, that's a big one. I even had a student who was taking a course online who had, I forget what bird it was, a crow or a raven or something, but uh, she described how this raven had this special clam smashing rock that it would leave on their windowsill. And every time he went out to the beach and found a really great clam, he'd bring it back to the windowsill and smash it on this really great rock. Um, amazing, right? Yeah. But there has been a sort of yeah, like Jaden says, there's been an increase in women. Um, is there a decrease, or is it simply that we've reached a sort of parity? I'm not sure. I don't know. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this sort of privileged position, it's not just about who gets the job, as we'll see today. Um, it's also about the perspective from which philosophy and science has been done. And again, bring it back to Dr. Goodall, great example. At the time when she was doing what she was doing, um, the field would have been much more heavily dominated by men. Um, so in that sense, Dr. Goodall is a trailblazer, not just in more than one sense, right? And here too, we are a class that is made up of multiple different genders, and I want to hear from everybody. Not that I don't usually hear from everybody. You guys, as I've said before, you are a really good group for talking and asking me great questions and making this lecture lively. So let's keep that going for today. Okay, I want to hear from everybody. Um, so we're all of these problems are a concern of feminism. Now, I'm not an expert in feminist philosophy, but I try to be reasonably well informed. Um, and at its core, what feminism really is about is equality of the genders. Feminism is not, as it's unfortunately often portrayed by sort of like those red-pilled people on the internet. It's not about the superiority of women. It's not about disenfranchising men. It's about equality of the sexes or equality of the genders ultimately. So that's something that I think I want to get out right away, just so that we know where we're headed with this. So the percentage was pretty close. 56 post-secondary students. Oh, so that's students, Jaden. Yeah, yeah. I don't know how it looks as far as people actually in teaching and research positions. As I said, in the philosophy department here, we've done pretty good. And it's not. I just want to get this out of the way. It's not some quote unquote affirmative action stuff, right? I mean, the people we have here teaching, men and women, are like world class scholars. They're here because they're damn good at what they do. You know, I'm lucky to be working with these people. Um, but it's true, like even this change, I remember in my grandmother's day, my mother's mom, she told me once when I was thinking of what I was going to do with my future. And she said to me, when I was where you are, women either went to school to become secretaries or nurses. And that was pretty much it. Of course, my grandmother wanted to be a concert pianist. She wanted to play the piano. And she did play the piano, but she wanted to do it professionally. Unfortunately, that's not how things worked out. But yeah, the choices were very limited. The choices are not limited uh, like they were today, and that explains the difference in the levels of enrollment between the genders. Um, oh, really? Labor force participation is way high as well. In recent years, interesting. Yeah. So, but yeah, just I don't want to get bogged down in a bunch of statistics, right? I want to say, um, I just wanted to kind of give you the foundation, as it were, where we're starting from. Um, so let's look at a few aspects of traditional epistemology that feminist epistemology criticizes, right? So one, traditional epistemology, which, as we saw yesterday, we can characterize as Cartesian, has us imagine what Crumley describes as a rational, dispassionate knower, right? This is probably wrong. And it probably, according to the feminist philosophers, the feminist epistemologists, really misrepresents science as it's actually practiced. It could also be mistaken and harmful to think of it like this, to think that we are um, perfectly rational, perfectly objective, uh, perfectly able to do philosophy. I think I'm missing something in the chat. Oh yeah. Well, there's an interesting discussion here about the breakdown across programs, and yeah, it does depend on the program. So whose microphone is on? Nicholas. No, I can hear something. Just it is a little bit distracting. So if your mic is on and, just check, just double check, okay? So, couple of themes here that are related to this sort of feminist epistemologist critique about how we actually practice science. One is obviously um, how we understand reason and objectivity, and another is the privileged place that reason and objectivity have in how we understand science and how it's practiced, right? And so, what this really boils down to is androcentrism, which means a sort of male centeredness, right? And the worry here is that um, traditional epistemology and the sciences as traditionally practiced see things from a sort of male-centered point of view, perhaps neglecting the perspectives of other genders, predominantly women, but more recently, for example, non-binary and trans folks, right? But another concern is that um, the production of knowledge and the nature of knowledge is not perfectly objective and rational, but rather social. It's something that we do as people together, collaboratively, rather than as Descartes did, by ourselves being perfectly objective and rational, sitting in an armchair or something, right? Um, so let's talk about this notion of the legend. Um, this sketch is what Philip Kitcher calls the legend. And it refers to a sketch of our common sense notion of science, which is firstly that the scientific production of knowledge is guided by reason. And you're probably thinking, well, yeah, isn't that true? Well, we certainly want it to be true, but is it really how it works? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. Two, science is an individual enterprise. Well, as I've already kind of hinted at, is it really an individual enterprise? I think it's arguable that when science started to emerge from philosophy, there was always natural philosophy, but science as a term kind of came about in the 18th, 19th centuries, and that's kind of when science developed into its own, kind of came into its own and kind of just started to distinguish itself from philosophy. And absolutely, there were people working individually around that time and prior to that, doing science. But nowadays, as we'll see, it's a lot different. And I can attest to this, having worked in a lab. It's incredibly collaborative. It is absolutely no longer true that science is an individual enterprise. But our common sense notion of science might lead us to think that it is. Thirdly, the knowledge enterprise of science is foundational, and think back to foundationalism here, right? Um, just as the foundationalist epistemologists thought that our systems of belief are foundational in the sense that they our non-basic beliefs trace their justification to basic beliefs. Similarly, in the sciences, higher order scientific knowledge is seen to be foundational upon lower order or more basic scientific knowledge. We talked about this when a few lectures ago, I think, when somebody brought up the notion of reductionism, right? You can reduce biology to chemistry. You can reduce chemistry to physics, and you're explaining everything at a lower level of analysis, but you're not losing anything that's true in your description when you do that. That's reductionism, which I think is related to this foundational sort of thing. Yeah, yeah, that's right, Jaden. Psychology really started coming into its own. Well, it's kind of like a multi-pronged thing, but in the late 19th century, and stretching into the early 20th, I suppose, you had a lot of things going on in psychology. Uh, well, obviously Freud, um, and Freud, I think, really represents a strong break from philosophy because Freud was firstly trained as a neuroscientist or a neurologist, rather, not a psychologist because psychologists didn't exist. Um, and he was very, very well read in philosophy. You had William James, who is counted as a philosopher and a psychologist, as we've seen here in this very class. And you had the psychophysicists as well, all working around the same time. And that's kind of how psychology emerged. But it was still quite individual, right? Freud sitting in his practice psychoanalyzing people, right? Um, yeah, and hey, Sean, that's a really good point. Yeah, you're right. Sean says here in the chat, Freud had tons of incorrect assumptions about women that misled a lot of people. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why Freud kind of has a bad rap in philosophy now, or part of the reasons. Part of the reason. Another reason is that he was just not all that scientific. I still think he's worth reading. If you want, this is how I put it to my students. If you want to understand art, like film or ancient myths, um, you should read Freud. If you want to be a good psychologist, you can probably skip Freud. Um, but there are other things that Freud is good for. In fact, some of Freud's stuff has actually informed some of my own research on the uncanny valley phenomenon. Of course, I disagree with him, but I do think he gets a lot of the big general themes right. Um, But anyway, better talk to your psychology professor about Freud rather than me. Or don't. You might anger your psychology professor by asking them about Freud, right? And finally, the fourth common sense notion is that science leads us to objective truths. And we'll unpack that more as we go. There are some other features of science that I think are worth mentioning. Scientists tend to be realists, right? They tend to think that the things science discovers, or perhaps even the concepts that scientists use to explain things, really exist independently of our minds. So protons, neutrons, electrons, quarks. Um, I mean, some scientific pragmatists might say that these are just useful theoretical concepts that allow us to make predictions about the natural world. But the realists would say, no, no, there really are protons, neutrons, and electrons, and they really are made of quarks, and they really do exist. They'd exist if we weren't around to study them scientifically. That's what it means to be a realist about science. Yeah, yeah, I don't blame him. Yeah. The uncanny valley, it's not really relevant to what we're talking about today, but I do have actually a lecture on this on my YouTube channel if you want to check it out. It was a talk I gave for the Center for Inquiry Canada during the pandemic. Actually, that was cool because the keynote speaker there was William B. Davis. He played the smoking man on the X-Files. So that was kind of cool. I went right before he did. Very cool. Um, but the uncanny valley refers to that sense of eeriness we get when we encounter very human-like artifacts. Um, if I start talking about this, I won't shut up about it because it's what I wrote my master's thesis on. So, like, you can pick my brain on the Discord server or go and read my master's thesis if you want, if you dare. Um, yeah, why does your prof not like Freud, McKenna? I mean, I could think of any number of reasons, but specifically, what is it about Freud that irks your professor? And while we're waiting, yeah, Jaden, yeah, Freud did use cocaine in his early, well, probably when he was a little younger than myself, and he wrote letters to his friends like, "Oh boy, cocaine is great. I'm getting so much work done." And then a few years later, guys, I think I'm going to stop doing cocaine. Like, and of course, he was a fan of the cigars. He actually got like cancer of the mouth, which was probably due to his cigar smoking. Not a good way to go. Um, yeah, just thinking about that. Oh, oh. Science and reason go hand in hand is another feature of science. We're the scientists. We're rational. We are reasonable. And science is supposed to be value free, which it's not that, feminist philosophers are concerned with all of these, but I think that some of them are especially concerned with this claim that science is value free. They disagree strongly with this claim. So this whole sketch here that Crumley has provided for us is the legend, what Philip Kitcher calls the legend. And you can see very clearly this commitment to objectivity and reason. And these are the commitments that feminist philosophers critique. Now, keep in mind, critique here doesn't necessarily mean criticize. It means investigate, analyze, right? That sort of thing. So, what the feminist philosophers are doing is taking a look at science, who many people think is supposed to be perfectly rational and perfectly rational, perfectly objective, and they're looking at science and saying, "Is that really the case? Let's look at it." That's what's happening here. So, in the chat, yeah, yeah, that's right, the jaw cancer. Um, oh, geez, yeah, well, I mean, that might be a short-term solution. Treating your nose pain with cocaine. I'll tell you what you could do is you could not do cocaine, and then maybe your nose wouldn't hurt as much. By the way, whenever the topic of drugs comes up in one of my classes, I always say uh, that I always like to let my students know that the health and counseling services is there. You're in university. It's a time when you're getting out into the world and you try things, right? But if you find yourself having tried something and you want to stop and you're having trouble, health and counseling services is there, right? So I'm just putting that out there. Just a little public service announcement. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like and it's true and like look, it works if you want to understand certain things. I don't think it works if you want to understand this, right? I mean, you can use Freud for talking about film, literature, theater, even architecture, but ironically, not the thing he wanted to understand, right? Yeah, Nietzsche. Well, yeah, Nietzsche, who Freud was well read on. Freud knew Nietzsche, Schopenhauer very well, not the people, but their work. But Nietzsche um, was a very sick individual who spent a good deal of his life in a lot of pain. And of course, 19th century medicine wasn't what it is today. And that's why Nietzsche was doing so many drugs. Um, yeah, yeah. So, and another, I don't want to get on too much of a tangent about Freud, but like the way I look at Freud, and this is what Sean's comment kind of reminds me of, is like Freud got most of the details wrong, but he got some parts of the big picture right. Um, if it weren't for Freud, we wouldn't be thinking about the unconscious mind at all. And our notion of the unconscious mind did change in the cognitive revolution, right? In the 20th century, we started thinking about the cognitive unconscious rather than the Freudian subconscious. But again, like I know Nietzsche reads as quite sexist to us now, but um, previously, and this relates to what we're talking about with objectivity, since Aristotle, right? Man was the rational animal, not men and women, man, right? And we have reason. We're the animal with reason. Again, bring it back to Jane Goodall. Animals don't have reason. That's only something that we have, particularly men. And Freud comes along and says, "Whoa, we're not rational." And the reason why we're not rational is because there are all kinds of unconscious forces at play that we are not even aware of. Now, again, he was wrong about a lot of the details. We don't, it's not, we're not irrational because we all have, an unconscious desire for this or that, right? The shop-worn example is the Oedipus complex. But there are unconscious cognitive processes at play that affect our rationality. So Freud was wrong about a lot of the details, but he was the first person to think like, hey, what if there's stuff going on under the hood that we're not aware of, and that affects our rationality. So yeah, a little bit sexist, but also saying something that a lot of feminist thinkers would agree with there. And this is why it's worthwhile reading Freud. Not to be a good psychologist, but maybe if you want to be a good philosopher, you should read Freud. Okay, so let's start with objectivity. Um, Perhaps. I mean, like I said, he did cease using it because he realized how addictive it was and how easily available it was. This is a time when you could get it from your pharmacy. You got to keep that in mind, right? Um, uh, so, but he did continue kind of in the same vein, right? Hmm. Yeah, Sean, maybe you're right about that. Kind of alone in his field, big ego. Yeah, his nose definitely wouldn't have hurt as much. Although people did also inject cocaine back in the day, so I don't know. Anyway, anyway, enough about Freud. Objectivity. Um, One dimension of objectivity is epistemic. This is called like point of view independence. We all have our own subjective point of view. But remember, science is supposed to be objective. It's not supposed to be subjective, at least on the traditional view, right? Science is supposed to kind of tell us about the world from no one's point of view. Science provides what Thomas Nagel called the view from nowhere, right? That's the sense in which science is supposed to be objective. So that's the epistemic dimension of objectivity. But another is a metaphysical dimension. Um, this is the idea that scientific objectivity gives us facts about how the world really is, right? And this is the realism. This is scientific realism, right? If we use science and discover something about the world, it's because that thing we've discovered is true, mind independently. It would be true even if we hadn't discovered it, even if there were no people around to do science. It would be true, right? Now, what feminist epistemologists try to do is criticize these two aspects of objectivity. They do this by pointing to cases, for example, of bad science, where research is way non-objective. What are some examples? Crumley gives us some. What are some examples of bad science when science is not objective like it's supposed to be, when it does not reveal truth? Andrew Wakefield. That's right. Perfect example, Andrew Wakefield. I mean, this guy wasn't objective. This guy was it's a very interesting case actually. This guy was incentivized um to manipulate the data to make it look like the MMR vaccine there was a causal link between the MMR vaccine and autism spectrum disorder. And I cannot emphasize this enough. There is not. Okay? Vaccines are safe and effective. Hell, Tylenol is safe and effective, right? Apropos of the autism announcement that took place recently. There's a few other good ones. Yes, Kellogg. This guy created cornflakes because he thought people were too horny. and that maybe the cornflakes would make people less emotive, right? Yeah, a good point. Research done about trans people. Um, Galen, can you elaborate? Like, is it about getting funding? Like, if you want to study something pertaining to trans people, is it hard to get research funding? Is that what you mean? While I'm waiting for your answer, Nestle creating, yeah, to say, yeah, 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 interesting. I didn't know about that. Oh, okay, I see. Are we talking like a pro or or like a positive or negative bias, Galen? Yeah, I'd say Aristotle could count, but you gotta keep in mind that Aristotle is almost, I mean, we can think of him as a scientist, but how the science was done then was just so different than how it is now, right? Oh yeah, the research, yeah, like trans people in sports, yeah. Yeah, I agree. The negative bias. See, see obviously like, and I don't want to say too much here because I am a member of, like, I am one of the people that if I were in a different time and place, I could have ended up as a one of these scientists that the feminist epistemologies are critiquing, right? Like I do have privilege in the sense that I am, like a white cisgendered man. Um, I I I I I support the trans community, but I also don't feel like I should speak for them. Because I'm not personally affected by a lot of this, but I do see the negative. Oh, my internet connection. Hopefully, I don't start lagging. But yeah, the a lot of the research into like yeah, why are there trans why and the sports stuff. Yeah, I don't like what I see. Yeah, I don't like I mean well, look, this is all illustrative of the fact that science is not bias free, which is why this is a really good example, right? Even though I'm not the most knowledgeable person to speak on it. Um yeah. What there was something else. Yeah, Aristotle stuff. Phlogiston, yeah. Yeah, the phlogiston stuff. Oh, there's wasps everywhere this time of year. Demonstrating trans people had a hot. Yeah, yeah. Oh, Sean, yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, I mean, there's a lot of pseudoscience out there, and it's not just related to, trans issues. I mean, you're seeing it now with related to uh the neurodiversity movement. Again, RFK's autism stuff is just insane. Um, and then I guess the reason I mentioned that is because there is quite a significant overlap between the neurodivergent community and the trans community, actually, which that is an interesting thing that's come out of the research. Um, but yeah, the important thing is, I think the thing that gets lost in both of these things is like we got to remember, look, we're talking about human beings here. We're trying to understand human beings, right? So if you see something like what Sean mentions, like the regret rates from this National Institute of Health study are closer to 1% rather than 30, you've got to think about like how is that going to affect the people that this matters to, right? Like we're talking about people here. So we always got to keep that in mind, and that's kind of like a litmus test for me. If I see something that says this and this about trans people or people on the spectrum or about women or about whatever, I got to be like, okay, like How good a job are they doing about remembering that these are actual human persons that they're talking about? And if it looks like they're doing a bad job, it's often a red flag for bad science. Yeah. So, okay, so the example that I was going to bring up, these are all really good examples. The example I was going to bring up, again, kind of related to neurodivergence. Um, and you can volunteer or not volunteer, whatever information you want to here. But I'll speak about my experience first. Yeah, sorry guys, my internet was a little wonky there. Is it better now? Okay, good. So those were all great examples, is what I was saying. The example that I wanted to bring up, um, when I was in school, in elementary school, I think back about my time there. Um, almost nobody had Asperger's syndrome. I know it's not called that anymore, but and there were some people with ADHD, but they were all boys. But now, tell me about your experience. You probably know um, men and women who have received perhaps a diagnosis of ADHD or a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or both. Why is that? Well, back in my day, it was thought that these were neurodevelopmental disorders that predominantly affected boys. Um, what turns out to have happened is that ASD and ADHD can be expressed a little differently depending on your gender. And the picture of ADHD and of autism spectrum disorders that we had at the time was a picture that came about because we only looked at boys, right? Not young girls. And that's why there has been a sort of increase in the diagnoses of, for example, ADHD in women because the criteria have changed because we've realized that, well, no, it's not that only boys get ADHD. Girls do too. It's just that it looks different a lot of the time. So that's an example. A new message. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Galen says a lot of the time they only start the process to diagnose people for neurodivergencies if you're hella disruptive. Yeah. Yeah, so and that's a good point, right? There are various types that there's a hyperactive type of ADHD, there's an inattentive type, and there's a mixed type. So those people that I knew in elementary school who had ADHD were predominantly of the hyperactive subtype, the ones that were disruptive, right? My partner was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, you know, because she was not allowed disruptive person in elementary school. But she continued to experience certain difficulties uh, into adulthood, and it was just something that, once she figured it out, it was like, oh, this makes everything make sense. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, with ADS, with autism spectrum disorder. Yeah, at the age of 50. Yeah. Yeah, so these are all great points, and that's a sort of interesting illustrative point, right? Together with all of your excellent examples. Boy, I'm rambling a lot. Oh yeah, Daniela. No, I knew what you meant. Yeah, Jaden at 19, eh? I am. I've often wondered if I had been a little bit younger, if I would have been identified as I don't know what exactly. Um, I did have a psychoeducational assessment here at Carleton. But the guy said I couldn't have been on the spectrum because I had a girlfriend. Again, I don't know if that's bad science. I don't know if I'm of this or that neurotype. It's just an example. Um, yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I'm at peace with it. Like as the philosopher Popeye said, I am what I am, right? So yeah. Oh, Khalid has a good point here. Psychological disorders, they do, Samir. At least they did when I was here. Although, if it's the same people, I would say maybe it's the same problem with the disruptive kids in elementary school. If you're not super obviously experiencing some type of problem, it's difficult to get a diagnosis. Then again, it's difficult to get a diagnosis in other respects because if you get it done at Carleton, you can actually get a grant from OSAP that will cover your assessment, and you can't do that with an outside practitioner. You would have to get it covered. You'd have to pay out of pocket or get it covered by your health insurance if you have health insurance, right? So, but Samir, if you're curious, or if any of your friends are curious, maybe I don't know if it's for you or someone else, but if anyone who's interested, the Paul Menson Center is the place to start. Yeah. But yeah, like Khalid says, a lot of things can overlap. Bottom line, people are complicated. People are really complicated. People are hard to figure out, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's another thing because like now we have to support a kid with maybe some extra accommodations and that costs money and it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. I think that's part of the reason why self-identification has become, um, something that that like the neurodiversity movement kind of advocates for. Um, yeah, all of this is in some way related to what we're talking about today, though. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion. Very good. I'm just worried we're going to run out of time. Um, actually, I want to see how many slides we have left to cover. I'm on slide 5 and oh, and there are 10. Oh, okay. We might just make it. We might just make it. So another critique that feminist epistemologists have is to deny the possibility of purely objective science. That doesn't mean we can't necessarily have objective knowledge. It just means that science is not always objective, right? They claim rather that science reflects the values and beliefs of the people who are doing the science, and it also reflects, on that basis, the social settings, we'll call them, of the scientists, or maybe the social situation of the scientists. So, depending who you ask, this means that the results of the sciences might not be perfectly objective. Rather, scientific truths might be social constructions. So we'll have to talk about that in more detail because I think this is a term that often gets misunderstood, right? After all, as I say on the second point here, not all sorts of social construction, social, excuse me, not all social constructivists say that, like, not all of them are anti-realists about knowledge, if that makes sense, right? So some of them reject the idea of a mind independent reality, like the postmodernists might. They might say, like, nothing really exists independently of the human mind. Everything is a social construction, but it's almost like a metaphysical claim, where it's like they might like protons, neutrons, and electrons. They don't really exist. Those are just things we made up that help us explain things that happen in the world. Um, but not all do. Like Linda Fagan is not like an anti-realist about social constructions, right? In fact, I think social constructions can be quite real. Um, so what are some social constructions that you would say are quite real, that exist mind independently? right? That's what I mean by real, by the way. Money, yeah. Tigers. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, tigers, money. Justice, gender. Yeah. These are real. When people accuse you of just, being a social constructivist, what I like to do is ask them for all of their money, right? Like if you think that all of this is socially constructed, well, just give me money, give me all your money. It's not real after all. Well, you're not going to give me all your money because even though it's a social construction, it's important, right? Yeah, good point. Yeah, nations, countries, I would say. Well, I had a political science professor who described nation states as these sort of imagined communities, and in a sense, yeah, that's it's kind of like what they are, right? Time, I don't know. I don't know if I would say time. Um, I guess it depends what you think about time. Certainly gender. Well, different economic systems and social classes. I think we could make an argument. Gender, certainly, but it's also one of those ones that are real, right? Like, when we say that gender is a social construction, what most people don't mean is that, um, it's all imaginary. And yeah, there are like real facts of the matter about things like physiology and biology. Um, but gender, like somebody mentioned, gender roles is absolutely a social construction because we can see how that's changed in different societies. And oftentimes, there's a lot of overlap. So just by, if you say, for example, that like a lot of those awful like J.K. Rowling type people do, saying those appealing to biology, basically being biological reductionists. Well, like, hey, I mean, I'm not this kind of scientist, but there might be certain biological, neurological factors that go into gender, right? But how we understand it, how we draw the lines around those things that exist out there in the world, those are the socially constructed bits, maybe. And it doesn't mean that things aren't real, right? But it's interesting to look at gender roles in particular because there have been so many interesting gender roles throughout history. Um, um, I mean, one thing that's gained kind of like more widespread mainstream acknowledgement is yeah, I was about to say, Galen, like in the indigenous communities of North America, there's this notion of two-spiritedness, right? And this is kind of maybe like an umbrella term, like it could refer to somebody who's trans or non-binary as we would describe them. It could also apply to somebody with a different sexual orientation, right? But you're right. There are these sort of uh, the third genders that we see in different cultures at different times and places. Um, so, um, these are social constructions that may, to some extent or another, map onto something interesting biologically or physiologically or neurologically that's happening. Um, so like those are real. Those are real things. They're not imaginary, made up stuff, right? And when it comes to social constructivism, I'm with Linda Fagan. I'm like, it does not mean like saying something is a social construction does not mean I have to be an anti-realist, right? I'm a realist. I think there really are these things. There really were, um, you know, various third genders in various cultures. There really are trans and non-binary people. And again, always got to remember these are real people. Okay, and let's be Kantians on this one and treat everyone as an end in themselves, right? Worthy of dignity. So, getting back to Fagin, this has been a really awesome discussion, by the way, everybody. This is really great. I'm worried we'll run out of time, but you guys are just such a great bunch. Love it. So, what does Linda Fagin say? Linda Fagin says, our standards of justification, epistemic and scientific, arise from historical and social settings, right? And a lot of theories, moreover, are underdetermined by evidence. It's values that actually help us to bridge the gap between when it comes to deciding between rival theories on the basis of evidence. And you can see this a lot nowadays. I think like a few of you mentioned like the bad gender science stuff. Like when it comes to the question of, trans people in sports. There is some science. There's some things we know. There's a lot of things we don't know. But we have to decide what to do now. And some people decide on the basis of a little bit of evidence and a lot of values rather than a lot of evidence and little values, right? So that's an example of the kind of thing that Linda Fagan is talking about here. Well, and it's social and cultural values, particularly that are at play. All right. Now, these things can get a little bit more complicated and perhaps controversial if we extend them simply, from simple values to the arrangements of society or to power structures. I mean, that's really where radical feminism gets its name from. Like feminism is about equality of the genders. Radical feminism says, well, what we need to do is actually dismantle these power structures and rebuild them. Um, so yeah, that's where the radical in radical feminism comes from. Like dismantling the patriarchy, right? Like you've probably heard this. It doesn't mean like, yeah, torches and pitchforks. Let's get all the men, let's get all the male professors, and let's get them. No, it's not like that. But it's like the power structures, the system itself needs to be changed in order for us to reach equality, right? I was going to pause for discussion, but we've had so much discussion already that I think we can keep on going. This is the core claim, though. On social constructivism, the world's objects and their properties depend upon our own concepts and beliefs. So the world is structured by us in an important sense. It's not exactly Kantian, but it does kind of remind me of Kant. You know how Kant said there are categories of understanding and forms of sensible intuition, where the mind kind of imposes the structure on our experience of the world, such that our experiences have the structures that they do. In a similar way, I guess you can think of our concepts and beliefs, our values particularly, as shaping the way we see the world. And again, you don't have to be an anti-realist about this. I would say like I would encourage you not to be an anti-realist, right? Um, because I think things exist. Things do exist. Um, I don't think we're in the Matrix, or that everything is a social construction in the anti-realist sense. Um, but these thinkers have a point. The way we see the world and interact with it is shaped quite a lot by the values that we have. So can we be objective is the question. Yeah, I see what you're saying, Jaden. Like categories existing. And I think this is what I was trying to say before. Like stuff exists. How we categorize it, right? The way we carve up the world seems to depend a lot on the values we bring along with us when we're doing science. And I think that's the key takeaway. from feminist epistemology, right? So there are things that exist, and then there are the categories we put them in, and those categories can change depending on the social and cultural context, right? And yeah, Galen, you're probably right. Like, we can never be perfectly objective, but we want to get to be as objective as we can. And I think, following some of these feminist thinkers, being as objective as possible means acknowledging that we aren't objective because values play a role in how we practice science and philosophy. We can be more objective by realizing that we are not perfectly objective. That's a starting point, right? Well, I don't know. Maybe, Jaden. Maybe we can be more objective about the nature of the universe, but I don't know. I don't know because it's still humans that are doing that, right? I'm sure there's an example out here that will illustrate what I mean, although I can't seem to think of one at the moment. Well, just think of the Bone Wars. Do you guys know about the Bone Wars? Yeah, 19th century paleontology and basically, it was a rush to see who could discover more dinosaur bones and people would like make up species, put the bones together the wrong way, destroy other people's bones. Women were not digging up bones. It was basically these two guys having this bone war, right? Bone War would be a good name for like a post-apocalyptic heavy metal album too, come to think of it, but no, it is actually related to paleontology. Um, so check out the Bone Wars. And also, yeah, like women couldn't break into the field at the time. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right, Daniel. And we need to be aware of those biases. We need to be aware of the values we bring into the picture. That will make us more objective, I think. So that's objectivity. Let's talk about reason. Reason is something that a lot of people would say, oh, obviously humans have reason, rationality. After all, Aristotle, right? Man is the rational animal. Of course, Aristotle really did mean men, not women. For Aristotle, older men, men with some life experience, were the wisest, particularly Greek men. Other people, those Germanic tribes from up north, they're barbarians. They have less reason than we Greeks do, right? They call them barbarians because to the Greeks, their language sounded like bar 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 bar, the ancient Greek equivalent of blah 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 blah. So when they would say someone was a barbarian, those are the blabbers, right? The blah blah blabbers. Their speech is strange. They don't have reason like we do. Aristotle would also say women have less reason than men. Slaves have the least reason because they come from these barbarian people, which is why it's okay for the Greeks to enslave them. Like Aristotle said, some people are naturally inclined towards being slaves, right? Not very reasonable to us, but now, we acknowledge actually humans are reasonable. Non-human animals too have a share of reason. That's like what I said earlier about, Jane Goodall's work was a contributing factor, I think, to people coming to realize this. In the chat, I think we can't be objective about anything. What about animal neurology? Well, animals, I'm not sure what you mean, Samir. Do you mean you must mean neuroscience on animals, since animals aren't doing neuroscience, right? It'd be cool if they were, if they did neuroscience. But yeah, we can do neuroscience on animals. Um, I would say yes, I think what you're saying, Samir, is that there is a difference between human brains and non-human animal brains. Absolutely. However, I think some of the differences in terms of the behavior, and particularly intelligent behaviors, have been overblown. Also, we've got to remember we're humans. We're embodied in our human bodies, which means we can recognize intelligence and reason in the animal kingdom when it's more similar to us, right? So when we see a chimpanzee using a stick to fish out some termites or something, it's using a tool with its hands. That's easier for us to recognize. It's harder for us to recognize, say, the way that like whales and dolphins are intelligent because they're embodied so differently. Or elephants, right? Oh, interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that little fact, but they did apply the term to everyone. And the Latin, I mean, the Greeks also had a word for barbarian, which was barbary, which they might have just appropriated from the Greeks. Um, for the Greeks, it would have been barbaroi. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. If that's true, I wonder why the Latin um, plural, I think, is barbary would still sound like that. Interesting, eh? I'm not a historical linguist, so I'm probably the not who you want to answer this question for you, but that's very cool. Oh boy, we're not going to finish all of this, but we'll pick it up next time. Um, Now, feminist philosophers don't have like one single theory on how reason and gender are related with one another, but a lot of them do agree that reason has been used to support these sort of androcentric views. For that reason, reason, they say, is a gendered concept, right? So Genevieve Lloyd, for example, says the reliance on reason, the sort of principal position that is given to reason in Western philosophy is androcentric or male centric, right? So there's a masculine bias there concerning reason. Right, Descartes, as we've seen, associated reason with this sort of disembodied, incorporeal, purely rational thinking substance, right? Reason shouldn't be affected by the body. And this really goes all the way back to Plato, um, right? Plato, who said that, the body is corporeal, it's corruptible, it's made of matter, but the soul is perfect. The soul is reason, logos, reason, true speech. The soul will exist when the body ceases to exist, right? It really goes all the way back to those views of the souls. Can you see why these views separating reason from the body might be considered a little androcentric? I mean, really, it kind of hits it's that idea that which again is not true. But it's that old idea that men are the reasonable ones and women are the passionate or emotional ones, right? And you can see this in if you look back in Descartes' day or even back in Plato's day, right? Descartes did work with some pretty smart women, right? He was the tutor to Queen Christina of Sweden. So Queen Christina was smart enough to learn philosophy, and since she was the Queen of Sweden, she had the resources to bring Descartes up and have Descartes teach her personally. Of course, he died of pneumonia while he was doing that, so haha, where's your reason now, Descartes? Or even Plato, right? Plato in the mean or in the Phaedo, actually, which describes Socrates' final hours before he's executed, has his wife Xanthippe just absolutely crying, like, "Oh no, poor Socrates, you're about to be executed." And Socrates, rather coldly, just says, "Can you take her away? Like, me and the boys want to do philosophy before I'm executed, right? And then they do a bunch of philosophy all night long, just an all night philosophy bro down. And then they all start crying because they're sad that Socrates is about to be executed. And then Socrates says, "Oh, I should have sent you away with my wife." Like, just absolute, like, unbelievable. Um, so yeah, I do see where they're coming from. This idea that reason is an androcentric kind of gendered notion on the basis that we've long associated reason more with men and the emotions or the passions more with women. And again, like when you realize that we're not being perfectly objective here, that's when we can start to be more objective. There are so many examples of super smart, rational women. There are so many examples of passionate men, right? That you can kind of see how this is a gendered concept. Yeah. Well, let's not go, right? You know what, Galen? The Greeks might have said, fellas, it doesn't matter if it's gay because it was kind of expected for upper class Athenians to be kind of gay, right? And this speaks to the change in gender roles, gender norms, gender identities over the years. Plato was gay. Plato was a gay man. Socrates was probably bisexual, and the Athenians practiced what's known as pederasty, where an older, experienced male teacher was expected to take a younger lover to kind of teach him about being a man. And then later, once that one grew up, the younger one, the younger learner, then he would go and get married to a woman. Yeah, yeah, they were. And the legendary figures, I mean, Achilles, his lover was Patroclus, right? And then Alexander the Great, the student of Aristotle, had numerous male lovers in addition to being married, to having a wife. It was just how it was. The Greeks weren't like, gay, straight. If you had said like to Socrates, like, bro, are you bisexual? Or to Plato, hey, so you're gay, right, Plato? Plato would have been like, I don't know what you're talking about. I love men. And Socrates, I love men and women. Alexander the Great loved men and women. It was just love. It wasn't like a gay or straight thing. You know what I mean? So would they have said, bro, is it gay to do philosophies and cry with your homies? Well, it wouldn't have been gay or straight. It was just what you did, right? Oh, really? I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of that. But he was accused of corrupting all those youth. Oh, really interesting. Galen, can you fill me in on some more of those details? Maybe at some point. I'd like to look into this. Maybe on the Discord server, send me a message there. One of the prosecutors. Oh, so Meletius, Anytus, or Lycon, one of those? One of those? Those were the three principal prosecutors of Socrates. Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about this more on the Discord server because that's pretty cool. Okay, we got a little over 5 minutes left. We're not going to finish all of this today, but we're going to get as close as we can. Then we'll wrap it up on Tuesday before we talk about perception. Sally Haslanger argued that traditionally, there's a little typo there on my slides, women, as I said, have been viewed as being guided by their emotions, men guided by reason. But this is, I think, absurd when you just look at the world. Not just ancient philosophy, right, where Socrates and the boys are all being very manly and crying with one another and playing with each other's hair on the eve of Socrates' execution. But remember, if you do, to the run up to the election, the first time Donald Trump was elected, when it was Trump running against Hillary Clinton. And you would hear a lot of rhetoric from the Fox News crowd about, we can't have a woman president, be too emotional. Now, there are plenty of things you can fault Hillary Clinton for, but I don't think this is one of them. And moreover, Trump is, I mean, well, this is not meant to be an ad hominem, but I think he's quite clearly, a very emotional sort of person. Um, right? He's passionate in the sense that he wants his enemies to suffer. He wants his friends to stroke his ego. Um, just listen to the man talk. He's not guided by reason, right? So, yeah, totally gendered concepts. And Atherton thinks reason is gendered, but perhaps for different reasons. She thinks actually it's Descartes' views that shaped the concept of masculinity, not so like Descartes presents this view of reason as this way that shaped the views of masculinity rather than masculinity shaping our views about reason. So it's a little bit of a 180, but still the same idea, right? Reason is a gendered concept. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we were talking about that earlier, Daniela, and previously as well. Like, I like how everybody was memeing the autism announcement graphic from Fox News. Like, it had Trump and JFK and the staff of Asclepius, and then it just said in big giant letters autism announcement. And everybody was memeing it pretty hard, which was amusing. Um, just a question Rebecca has. Yeah. Yeah, when I get a message about trains, autism announcement. It's perfect. Oh, perfect. So Rebecca's question, just a question. It's separate from within the lecture right now. So, oh, well, we'll see if we can. Oh, the quiz. Yeah, okay. So I'm aiming for a 2 week turnaround time. I am a little bit behind just because I've had a very busy time of late. So I'm hoping that by the end of next week or early the week after is what I'm hoping. But I will keep you all posted. And as soon as they're done, generally what I do is I post an announcement. It not an autism announcement, just a regular announcement, but I say on Brightspace, I was like, "Hey everybody, good job. Here are the marks. Go take a look. If you have any questions, you'll contact your TA or myself. By the way, I'm going to be posting an updated version of the course outline that has um, the TA contact information. So yeah, I like that Daniela because you also spelled quiz like Riz. So I'm going to start doing that. Khalid asks, did de Beauvoir's second sex have any mention of reference to reason within feminism? Um, you know what? I don't know. I haven't read the second sex, but you know what? You should. Uh, this is a great time. When when I was an undergrad, I read books that I had wanted to read my entire life just because now I had access to a library that had all of the books. So now you're at Carleton, you have this amazing library. You should go read it. Go read as many different books as you can, not just the ones you need for your classes. Like, take advantage of the time that you have here. Go read those books. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the TAs has reached out to introduce himself. Yeah. But check it out. Like university is amazing because it's not just your classes. Like you're kind of situated in this amazing learning environment, and you can go to the library and study, and you have this amazing opportunity for learning, not just what you're being taught in your classes, but beyond that. I miss it. I miss my undergrad days. I really do. Another thing you can do here when you're an undergrad is you can go to the poster sale. Tomorrow's the last day. I went. I got I can't show them because they're wrapped up, but I got a sick Spirited Away poster, Hayao Miyazaki. I got a sick Cowboy Bebop poster, and I got a gigantic map of Middle Earth. So definitely hit the poster thing over in Taranga Commons, especially if you live on campus in Res, get some cool stuff to put on your walls. Well, we didn't finish everything today because I was rambling and you were offering some really great points of discussion. Thank you again, all of you, for doing that. We'll finish this briefly um, on Tuesday, and then we're going to start looking at perception, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you, everyone. This has been a lot of fun, this lecture. This is exactly what I hoped for this lecture. A lot of great discussion, a lot of great questions. Thank you so much. Yeah, Cowboy Bebop is one of my favorite anime. Yeah, big fantasy map. Well, you can get them. You can get them. Oh yeah, School of Athens. That's a sick one. Yeah, check it out because tomorrow's the last day. So last chance. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Arena. Yeah, this is one of my favorite classes to teach, too. So, thank you all. We'll see you on Tuesday. We're going to finish up our discussion of feminist epistemology, and then we'll move on. Cheers, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, and have a good weekend. And bye for now.